finally ready to get rolling on this Hearts Tablerunner, and hopefully you have gotten one of these pieced. I just used scraps that I had in my stash, but you can make this with a jelly roll plus some extra fabric. So the link for this pattern will be in the description below, so make sure you check that out if you would like to make this Tablerunner. And I'm going to start out by working on piecing a back for my Tablerunner. So as I work on that, we'll kind of speed through this a little bit. I don't want this to take forever, but I am going to give you some tips on getting your quilt ready to go on the long arm. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to speed through this part a little bit, and the first thing I'm going to do here is get a straight edge going on this piece of fabric. And just a disclaimer, you do need to be very careful with using a rotary cutter. I cannot be held responsible for any type of injuries there. Very sharp, and you have to be very careful. Keep your fingers back from the edge of your ruler while cutting. So I'm making another straight edge on the other side. Then I'm going to need to get the next piece ready because the material I'm using isn't long enough for the entire Tablerunner. So I'll need to add another piece. And just taking this salvage edge off here. Looks like it's about time for a new blade. So we'll get this piece ready. Get another straight edge going. So that's how wide I need the piece to be. All right, now let's see how much we need to add to make the backing long enough. Since this is a small piece, I like to just lay it right on the backing and not do any more math than I have to. So I'm just going to lay it out and see how much I need to add. Make another straight edge along the ends. Now you can see this little part right here. I didn't realize that was uneven because from the other side it looked like it was even. So I'm just going to straighten that edge up again. Just laying the top onto the backing to see how much I need to add. Leaving myself some extra room. And trimming up this little piece. One reason I wanted to do the tutorial and kind of go through this step by step is because whenever you are piecing backs and you're using scraps of fabric, you're going to run into all different kinds of issues and little things that pop up that you maybe weren't expecting. And through that whole process, as you saw, I had fabric that was kind of cut off on the back, so I had to make adjustments there. But it is good to give yourself that extra room. Whenever I was quilting for clients, I always told them 3 to 4 inches extra of backing and batting on all sides. And that way, if the quilt was a little wonky and you had to make things work, you had that extra room to play with. So on a Tablerunner, I don't usually do the 3 to 4 inches extra. Maybe 1.5 inches or 2 inches, just so you have that extra space. So now I'm going to go ahead to my sewing machine, sew up this seam, get it pressed, and then I'll do a double check to make sure that it's all squared up and ready for the long arm. It's a good idea to pin your fabric together when getting ready to piece the back. And and I'm just gonna stick 3 pins in to hold the fabric in place. And I keep them away from that edge so that I'm not running over the pins whenever I go to sew the seam. I'm going to go ahead and press the seam open, and that'll cut down on some of the bulkiness when we're quilting. So I've gotten this piece together, and I'm just going to do a final check. I want to make sure that this edge is straight and that this edge is straight. And when I laid this down, you can see that I've got a little bit of extra sticking out right here. So I'm just going to double check this, make sure it, because we know that needs trimmed up a little bit. So I'm going to lay my ruler on here, make sure it's straight along that folded edge, and I can see where it bows out a little bit. So I'm just going to trim this up. And that's all I had to trim off, was that little bit there. And I'm going to go ahead and square up this side as well. I don't really use the lines on the mat, I just use the ruler. And this end is about 16 3/4. And this one is almost 17. So I'm just going to line that up, line up either the edge of the ruler or one of the lines on that fold. Right about there. If you try to load your backing and it's not straight on the, let's say, the top and the bottom of your backing, then you're going to end up with one side of your quilt being too tight and the other side being too loose as far as the backing goes. So we want to make sure that we have straight sides so that it will load nicely. All right, we're ready to start pinning. Before I take my backing over to the long arm, I did want to mention that especially on big quilts, maybe not necessarily on table runners, but on big quilts, I usually mark the center, and you can do that by taking just a little nick out of the corner, or if you would rather, you could take a pen or marker and do just a little dot on the corner. Just be careful though, you don't want to drop your marker and make a mark on your fabric. So I usually do just that little tiny cut off of the corner there. And then when I go to load it, as you'll see in a minute, there's this little mark, and I know that that's my center. Okay, I'm ready to load this on to my leaders, and there's many different ways that you can do this. I have always been one to pin my quilts on, and that's what I'm going to show. You can also get red snappers, which is another system of a way that you can load your quilt onto the leaders. There's lots of YouTube videos out there on how to do that. And on my leader, I have a little mark right here. It's just a little dot, and that's the center. So I'm going to line up that little mark that I made on the wall hanging, or the table runner, and line that up with that dot. And then I pin about 1/4 inch away from the edge. And I'm going to do that the whole way down, going this way, and then I'll do the other side. And you always want to pin through your leader first. That's always been a rule of thumb. And if you got your machine from a dealer, then maybe you got lessons on how to load quilts. I used to really dread loading a quilt because it does kind of take a while when you're doing pinning, but I guess after all these years it's kind of therapeutic now. I really don't mind it. I usually do listen to an audiobook whenever I'm in the quilt room, or just music, and it helps the time pass. Something like this is not going to take that long. We're almost to the end already. So as you can see, these are all about the same distance, about 1/4 inch from the edge. And we spent all that time making sure that our backing was squared up. And so when you get to this next step, you don't want to cut corners and have your fabric not line up with the leader, or that can make a difference as far as your backing staying nice and straight and rolling up nicely as you quilt. One of these days I'll make a new pin cushion. I think I've had this one for about 10 years or so. Pink leopard. I'm gonna roll this backing up a little bit. Come back to the center. So here's my leader where I'm going to pin. This will be the top of the quilt, and I'm pinning it here. Now some people go around the back of their machine to do this part, but it's a little tight for me to get behind my machine, so I just started doing it from the front, and I just pull my leader towards me so that it's comfortable. And I'll get this all pinned. So right now I just finished pinning this side over here, and I wanted to mention, when you're pinning today, take a nice big bite of fabric. You don't want to have just a little piece of fabric caught. You want to have this nice big bite, but also leave enough of your pin so that it's not going to slip out. So here we are, we've taken nice big bites of our fabric. So now I'm going to come over here and roll up this backing. So I'm just rolling that back bar a little bit. And then I need to loosen this front one. And we're gonna kind of center that. Down here, our leader is all goobered up, so we're gonna fix that a little bit. These are all those little things that you run into when you're loading a quilt. But you do want to straighten that out so that it's not all gummed up on there. So we've got our backing all loaded. And then I'm going to grab my piece of batting and we will get that laid on there. This is my storage for my batting roll. And I use the warm and white cotton batting. And I've unrolled some of that down here, and my table runner is 14 inches wide and my backing is 16 and a half or 16 and 3/4. So I'm cutting my batting at 15 or 15 and a half, I guess is what I decided. So that way I'll have a little bit extra and I won't be trying to squeeze anything in. That'll give me plenty extra to work with. So I just marked 15 and a half with a little cut right here, and I'll go ahead and cut that strip of batting. Okay, I have laid the batting on the backing, and I wanted to point out one thing. Make sure you take any little threads off of your batting, because if you don't, those can show through the front of your quilt, and then it's just not fun to have to dig those out. There's a tool for that, but it's easier to just make sure that's nice and clean. And then this end where my batting is too long, I'm just going to take scissors and I'm going to trim this off. So next I'll lay my quilt top on there. Okay, I've laid this on there. I haven't really straightened it out exactly yet. I did get a little bit close on this batting over here, but it's still going to work. I have a little bit extra at the top. And you do want to go over your quilt top and cut off any little extra threads that might be hiding on there, or pick off any threads. I've got a loose one here. And sometimes what can happen is if you have an extra thread like this, but it's sort of a little loop stuck in that seam, your long arm foot can get stuck in that thread, and then it causes problems. So you want to take your scissors and go through and trim any excess threads off of your quilt top. And then I'm also going to clamp the sides of my quilt, and I'm going to show you that here in a second. We're almost ready to start. We're going to talk a little bit about the design, or some design options for this table runner, in the next section.